In a city where power towers above poverty, one secret changes everything. A politician, ruthless and cunning, hides his stolen fortune inside a mattress, his silent vault of greed. But when fury consumes him, one reckless act sends that mattress tumbling into the trash and straight into the path of a man who has lost everything. On the other side of the city dump, David, once a banker, now homeless, fights to survive another day. Beside him is Samuel, his loyal friend, the only person who hasn't given up on him. Together they scavenge for scraps under a burning sky, never knowing that fate has already chosen them for something extraordinary. Because sometimes life balances its own scales. The same mattress that carried corruption and deceit will soon carry redemption. This is a story of power, downfall, and the strange justice that hides in coincidence. The day a mattress full of money crossed from sin to salvation. The mansion rose at the edge of the city like a monument to power. White marble walls gleaming under the afternoon sun, golden gates shimmering like they had swallowed light itself. To outsiders, it was the home of a man who had conquered life. To those who worked within, it was a palace of silence, pride, and hidden rot. That man was Richard O'Deely, a politician so powerful his name alone made men lower their voices. In the papers, he was the people's guardian. In truth, he was their thief. Every morning, a convoy of black SUVs sliced through the city traffic. Richard sat in the back seat, sunglasses on, jaw steady, his expression carved from stone. Crowds waved as he passed. Cameras flashed. He smiled for them, the practiced smile of a man who'd long forgotten what honesty felt like. When he returned home each day, he walked past fountains, polished marble floors, and chandeliers that never stopped glowing. But none of it gave him peace. The mansion was quiet, but not with comfort, quiet like a held breath. Richard's closest companion was Michael, his personal assistant, younger, loyal, and sharper than most men in politics dared to be. Michael had started as a driver years ago, but Richard had seen something in him: intelligence, discretion, and the ability to keep secrets. He'd promoted him quickly, and in time, Michael became the only person allowed to stand near his boss when the truth got ugly. That afternoon, Richard stepped into the mansion with a heavy brown envelope tucked under his arm. Inside it, millions in government funds, cash meant for community development, schools that would never be built, wells that would never flow. He tossed the envelope on the table and motioned for Michael to follow him upstairs. They stopped in the master bedroom, a place that looked like a luxury catalog. Wide bed, glass balcony, floor-to-ceiling curtains. Then, Richard bent beside the bed, unzipped the mattress cover, and slid the envelope deep inside the foam. Michael hesitated. "Sir?" "Inside the mattress?" Richard looked up sharply. "Banks betray men. Mattresses don't." He zipped the fabric shut again, smoothing it like a ritual. "That's the safest place in the world. If everything falls apart tomorrow, I'll rise again from right here." It wasn't the first time he'd done it. Hidden inside that mattress were more than envelopes. There were bundles of hard currency, pounds, euros, dollars, the spoils of years spent in backroom deals and late-night meetings. Richard didn't trust accounts. He didn't trust people. He trusted silence and foam. At dinner that night, Richard ate alone. The table could seat 10 men, yet only one plate was used. His knife clinked against the porcelain, the only sound in the entire house. Michael stood nearby, expression unreadable, as his boss cut his steak with mechanical precision. Richard didn't mind the solitude. In his mind, it was proof of power. He'd outgrown the need for companionship. People were unpredictable. Money was not. After dinner, he walked out onto the balcony, whiskey glass in hand. The city below glimmered under the evening haze, car lights threading through the streets like veins of gold. He muttered to himself, half a sneer curling on his lips. They call me greedy, but what is greed when the whole world is already corrupt? His reflection in the glass smiled back, the only man he could still trust. Downstairs, in the servant quarters, Michael sat on his bed staring at the floor. His loyalty was a burden now. He'd seen too much. The fake contracts, the envelopes, the nervous businessmen who came in with promises and left lighter by millions. He rubbed his temples and whispered, "This house looks clean, but it's built on ashes." He had thought of quitting once. But where would he go? Men like Richard had long arms. Even from a distance, his shadow could still reach you. Still, that night, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to crack. The next morning, the mansion came alive with footsteps, gardeners trimming hedges, drivers polishing cars, the cook preparing breakfast. Richard sat in his study, cigarette smoke curling above stacks of documents he would never actually read. 3 businessmen sat across from him, sweating through their suits. Richard leaned back, voice calm. "You want this road contract? Then make it worth my time." The eldest of them slid a slim envelope across the desk. Richard didn't touch it, just flicked his eyes toward Michael, who wordlessly took it and tucked it into a file. "Good," Richard said, smiling faintly. "Now go tell the press how much I care about development." When they left, Michael turned toward him. "Sir, these payments, they're getting risky. The new audit—" Richard slammed a palm against the table. "Don't think, Michael. Handle it." "Understood," Michael said quietly. But as he looked at his boss, something inside him shifted, the first seed of pity, or maybe disgust. Richard poured another drink. "You know what keeps men like us alive? Fear. Not respect, fear. Once they stop fearing you, you're finished." He believed it. Every word. And maybe that belief was what had made him blind. That night, Richard drove himself to a small bar on the outskirts of town. No security detail, no convoy. He needed to breathe, or at least pretend to. The bartender recognized him, but knew better than to stare. Richard sat in a corner booth, ordered a double whiskey, and watched the news flicker on an old TV. The reporter spoke of rising poverty, broken roads, unpaid teachers. Richard smiled bitterly. "Half the funds for that story are under my bed." He finished his drink and stepped outside. Rain was falling, light, cold, almost cleansing. He tilted his face upward, feeling the drops like whispers of judgment. Then he muttered, "No one's clean. I'm just honest about my dirt." When he drove back home, the storm inside him was worse than the one in the clouds. Michael was waiting near the door when he arrived. "You shouldn't be driving yourself, sir," he said quietly. Richard brushed past him. "I needed space." "You've been drowning yourself in whiskey for 3 nights, Michael said, his voice firm for the first time. "You're losing focus." Richard stopped mid-step. "You forget your place." "I haven't," Michael replied, "but maybe you have. The place you came from." For a moment, time froze. The air between them went razor-sharp. Richard's glare could have split stone, but he said nothing. He simply turned and climbed the stairs, one heavy step at a time. Michael watched him disappear, his heart pounding. He knew he had crossed a line, but he didn't care. The man he once admired had turned into something hollow, a ghost wearing gold. The next morning came with a tension that could be felt in the walls. Servants moved quietly. Even the fountain outside seemed to murmur softer than usual. Richard sat at the dining table, a newspaper spread open in front of him but unread. His mind was racing. The audit, the whispers of betrayal, Michael's defiance the night before. He could feel his empire tightening around him like a noose. When Michael entered the room, holding a folder, the air snapped. "Sir, we need to talk," he said carefully. "It's about the committee. They're reviewing all contracts from your office." Richard slammed his fist on the table, rattling the cutlery. "You think I don't know how this game works?" Michael didn't flinch. "I think the game's changing." "Watch your tone," Richard growled. "I've watched my tone for 5 years," Michael said, "and I've watched you bury the future of this country in a mattress. You think fear will protect you? It won't. It's already turning on you." Something in Richard snapped. His breath came short, his hand shaking as he reached for a crystal ashtray. In one furious motion, he hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall. "Get out!" he roared. "Sir, I said, get out!" Michael hesitated, then turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed like a countdown. When the door closed, Richard stood alone, panting, surrounded by silence and broken glass. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the face of a man who had everything, and somehow, nothing. Then his gaze lifted to the ceiling, the bedroom above it, the mattress. He stormed upstairs, words tumbling from his mouth like curses. "They think I'm finished? Never. I still have my lifeline." He ripped the sheets from the bed and ran his hands along the surface, feeling the hidden bulges where money slept. Bundles, notes, salvation. "This," he muttered, "is my insurance." But as his rage spun, reason vanished. The voices of paranoia screamed louder than sense. "They'll come for it. They'll steal it. Even Michael could betray me." He gritted his teeth, seized the edge of the mattress, and dragged it off the frame. It crashed onto the floor with a dull thud. Step by step, he hauled it down the stairs, the foam scraping against marble, the servants frozen in terror. "Open the gate!" he barked. Outside, a refuse truck was parked nearby, collecting trash from the neighboring houses. Richard stormed toward it, dragging the mattress like a man possessed. The driver jumped out. "Sir, that's not—" "Take it," Richard shouted. "Burn it, dump it, I don't care. Just get it out of my sight." The driver hesitated only a moment before obeying. Within minutes, the truck's engine roared to life, the mattress tossed onto its metal bed among heaps of refuse and rags. Richard stood there, chest heaving, sweat rolling down his temples. Then, silence. And in that silence, the truth struck him like lightning. His fortune, his lifeline, his hidden empire, gone. He whispered almost to himself, "What have I done?" But the truck was already gone, swallowed by the maze of streets. From the window upstairs, Michael had seen it all, every furious step, every mad shove. He watched in disbelief as the truck disappeared around the corner, then exhaled slowly. "That's it," he murmured. "The fortress just fell." Because no empire, however powerful, survives the moment its king loses control. And miles away, beyond the glittering city, at the edge of a smoke-filled dump, a man named David bent over a pile of discarded metal, unaware that destiny was already rolling toward him in the back of a truck. The same truck that carried another man's downfall, and his own redemption. The city's edge was a different world. No marble walls, no gold gates, just heat, dust, and the endless sprawl of survival. Trucks rattled over potholes, spilling scraps that the forgotten fought over. Here, power meant nothing. Here, men traded sweat for bread. Among them walked David Nwosu, once a man of pressed shirts and quiet confidence. Now his shirt clung to his back, faded and torn at the collar. He bent over the garbage heaps with a crooked stick, eyes scanning for anything of value. Bottles, metal, wire, things city people threw away and called useless. To David, nothing was useless anymore. His friend Samuel worked beside him, taller, rougher, the kind of man who joked through pain. "Banker turned scavenger," Samuel said, half grinning, half pitying. "Life has a wicked sense of humor, my brother." David didn't look up. "Better a scavenger with breath than a banker without a job." His tone was calm, but each word carried the weight of years lost. Only 2 years earlier, David had walked through glass doors every morning, air-conditioned hallways, polished shoes clicking on tile. He had been Mr. David, The junior manager everyone admired, methodical, polite, trustworthy. The bank had been his second home, the office his pride. Then one morning, the branch manager called him in. No warning, no explanation, just that look people wear when they're about to bury good news. "David," the man said quietly, "you've been loyal, but headquarters is cutting staff. Today is your last day." Simple words, brutal impact. David remembered packing his few things: a photo of his parents, a pen he'd bought on his first payday, and a small notebook filled with dreams that suddenly meant nothing. Outside, the city noise had sounded different that day, louder, harsher, almost mocking. He had called Samuel, his old university friend, who worked then as a mechanic. Samuel met him near the bus stop, handed him a bottle of water, and said quietly, "Don't let one door convince you the world is out of doors." For months, David searched for another job. He wrote applications until his handwriting changed. He sat in waiting rooms where guards called his name wrong and receptionists looked through him. One by one, his savings vanished. Then came eviction. Then came the street. They found shelter in an unfinished building, a concrete skeleton on the edge of the city. No doors, no windows, only open wind and dust. At night, they lay on thin wrappers spread over cement, counting the stars through holes in the roof. When it rained, they stood until the water passed. When it was cold, they burned old tires. Once, a small fire took half of what little they had: blankets, clothes, a bag of beans. The smoke filled the room so thick it stole their breath. When it cleared, David sat on the floor, coughing, watching blackened walls. Samuel rested a hand on his shoulder. "Still alive?" he said. "That means the story isn't over." Those words stayed with David. They didn't fix hunger, but they kept hope breathing. Every morning they walked to the city dump with sacks slung over their shoulders. Scavengers worked there in silence, broken only by the clatter of bottles and the buzz of flies. The stench was fierce enough to make newcomers vomit, but after a while, even the smell became background noise. David's movements were slow but deliberate. He searched, sorted, sold. Routine had replaced dignity, but it gave him rhythm. Sometimes Samuel tried to lift his mood. "Remember when you used to sign checks? Now you're signing bottles," he'd laugh. David would smile faintly. "And both are still plastic." In the afternoons, they sold what they'd gathered to recyclers and used the few naira to buy bread, beans, and sachets of water. They learned which vendors cheated, which guards took bribes, which corners stayed dry when it rained. Life became mathematics, survival by calculation. Yet beneath the exhaustion, David carried something dangerous: memory. Every time he saw a man in a crisp suit step out of a car, a sharp pain twisted in his chest. He wasn't jealous, just haunted by the echo of who he used to be. On quiet nights, the two friends talked by candlelight. Samuel would say, "You still think about going back to the bank?" David would answer, "Sometimes I dream I'm there again. I wake up reaching for a pen." Samuel chuckled softly. "Maybe you're still writing your future." But David's face stayed serious. "Future doesn't come to people like us anymore." "Then we'll go to it," Samuel said. That was Samuel. Rough hands, wild humor, unbreakable faith. Where David saw walls, Samuel saw windows. Where David saw punishment, Samuel saw a test. "Maybe God's just making space," he said one night. "Takes everything away so he can give you something bigger." David had smiled at that. If he's giving it through this dump, he better hurry. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that hurts, but heals. Weeks later, under the same relentless sun, David was scavenging near the road when something caught his eye: a mattress lying crooked by the trash heap. It looked cleaner than most. Foam still firm, fabric only dusty. He stopped, blinked against the light, and stared. Samuel saw him freeze. "What is it?" "A mattress. David said slowly. Still good. Samuel shrugged. And heavy. Leave it. It'll break your back. But David's gaze didn't move. He remembered the cement floor they slept on, the pain in his spine each dawn. He pressed his palm against the mattress. It was warm from the sun, but solid, intact. He smiled faintly. We've slept on worse. Before Samuel could protest, David bent, gripped the edge, and lifted. It was heavier than he expected, but he didn't stop. Even if it crushes me, I'm carrying this one, he muttered through his teeth. People stared as the two men dragged the mattress through the street, some laughing, some shaking their heads. To them, it was trash. To David, it was mercy. By the time they reached the unfinished building, sweat soaked their clothes, but their spirits were lighter. They slid the mattress into their corner, wiped their faces, and collapsed on it, laughing between gasps. Samuel slapped the side of it. Soft. My back might forgive me after all. David nodded, smiling at the ceiling. Tonight, we sleep like kings. Neither of them knew that the mattress they just carried home was the same one Richard O'Deely had thrown away in rage, the same mattress stuffed with millions. That night, the city hummed outside while they lay still, half asleep, half grateful. The mattress creaked softly beneath them. For the first time in years, David's body didn't ache. He whispered, "Maybe this is the beginning of something." Samuel chuckled. "If comfort is a sign of destiny, then we're already rich." They laughed again, the sound echoing through the hollow building. Outside, the moon slipped behind clouds. Somewhere, far across town, Richard O'Deely sat in his mansion, staring at an empty bed, his hands trembling as realization hit. His secret fortune was gone. Two men, one broken by greed, one broken by circumstance, had just traded places without knowing it, and fate, silent and patient, smiled in the dark. Morning sunlight crept through the broken walls of the unfinished building, spilling over the mattress that now lay in the corner. The air smelled of dust and salt from nearby sweat. But for once, David didn't wake up sore. He stretched, blinked into the light, and sat up slowly, smiling faintly. The simple comfort beneath him felt almost holy. Samuel was already awake, boiling water over a small fire made of scrap wood. "You slept like a baby," he said. "You didn't even hear the rats marching last night." David chuckled, rubbing his eyes. Maybe the mattress scared them off. Samuel grinned. "Or maybe it was your snoring." They both laughed, their laughter echoing in the bare room like a forgotten song. It had been a long time since either of them had felt this light. As Samuel turned to sweep the floor, he lifted one end of the mattress. It didn't move easily. He frowned and tried again, this time with both hands. "Hey, this thing is heavier than it looks," he muttered. "You sure you didn't hide stones in here?" David looked up, amused. Maybe it's soaked with sweat already, but Samuel wasn't laughing. His brow furrowed as he pressed along the side of the mattress, feeling an odd stiffness inside. "Wait," he said quietly. "Come and feel this." David got up and knelt beside him. He ran his palm over the fabric. It was uneven, lumpy, but not like old foam. There were hard, flat shapes where softness should be. His heart began to beat faster. He pressed again, harder this time, then froze. "Samuel," he whispered. "There's something inside." Samuel sat back, confused. "Inside? Like what? Old rags?" David hesitated. His fingers trembled as he felt along the seam. Then, almost without thinking, he reached for the small blade they used to cut rope. He slid it carefully along the edge and peeled back a corner of the cover. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from the opening, a flash of color appeared. Green, blue, paper edges stacked tight together. He reached in and pulled one out. His breath caught. "Money," he said, voice barely a whisper. "It's money." Samuel stared, eyes wide. "You're joking." David held it up to the light. Foreign notes, pounds, euros, dollars, not fake, not local, real, crisp, bundled tight. Samuel stumbled backward. "Ah, David, this is madness!" David pulled out another bundle and another. His hands were shaking now, his chest rising and falling fast. The mattress was filled, stuffed, like a secret vault. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just stared at the fortune lying between them, breathing as if they were afraid the air might wake them from a dream. Then Samuel finally found his voice. "David," he said slowly, "we can't keep this." David blinked. "What do you mean, can't?" "This belongs to someone," Samuel said, his voice trembling. "Someone dangerous enough to hide this kind of money in a mattress." David turned sharply. "And what do you expect us to do? March into a police station and hand it over? You think they'll clap for us? They'll take it and we'll be the fools who found gold and gave it away." Samuel shook his head. "It's not about clapping. It's about conscience." David laughed bitterly. "Conscience doesn't feed hunger, my brother. Conscience doesn't build houses or buy food. Look around you. This is what conscience gave us." Samuel's jaw tightened. "And greed is what destroyed men like Richard O'Deely. You've heard his name. He's probably behind this kind of money. People like him hide their sins in places like this." David looked at the bundles again, his voice quiet. "Maybe it's God testing us." "Or tempting us," Samuel said. For a moment, silence filled the room again, the kind of silence that feels alive, heavy with choice. David sat down slowly, his eyes still on the money. "Samuel," he said softly, "I've been poor long enough to know this. Sometimes blessings don't come wrapped in light. Sometimes they come wrapped in dust." Samuel looked at him, torn between fear and loyalty. "So what do we do?" David took a deep breath. "We use it, but wisely. No showing off, no noise, no foolishness. One bundle at a time, slowly." Samuel's lips parted to argue, but something in David's tone made him stop. It wasn't greed. It was exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes when a man has suffered too long to think clearly anymore. David picked up one bundle, weighed it in his hands like it might disappear. Then he looked at Samuel. "Help me sew it back. If this money came to us, maybe it's because it's finally our turn." Samuel exhaled, long and slow. "Then we move quietly. Nobody must know." Together they stitched the seam closed again, pushing the fortune back into its hiding place. When they finished, the mattress looked exactly the same. Ordinary. Innocent. But everything had changed. That afternoon, David took one bundle, wrapped it carefully in an old newspaper, and tucked it inside his shirt. He walked into town, every step cautious. At a small currency bureau, he exchanged it for naira. The clerk glanced at him curiously but said nothing. When David walked out, the thick envelope in his hand felt heavier than stone. He didn't speak until he reached home. "It's real," he said simply. Samuel stared. "How much?" "Enough to buy food for a year," David said. His voice shook. "Enough to start again." That evening, they cooked rice with real oil and meat for the first time in months. The smell filled the building, drifting through the broken walls. As they ate, Samuel said quietly, "We're in danger, you know. If the wrong person finds out—" "I know," David interrupted. "That's why we move slow. No one can suspect." Samuel nodded, but even as they ate, both men knew that life had just drawn a new line between them and the world outside. They were no longer scavengers. They were custodians of something powerful, something that could save them or destroy them. Over the next weeks, they kept their promise. They took one bundle at a time, changing it, spending carefully. David bought clean clothes, a phone, a new mattress for their building, just for disguise. Samuel opened a small mechanic stall nearby, fixing bicycles and motorbikes. Bit by bit, their lives began to rise again from the ashes. But David's mind was always restless. Every night he stared at the mattress, listening to the muffled whisper of hidden wealth. It called to him, not with greed, but with possibility. He imagined houses, businesses, freedom. He imagined never bowing to another man again. Samuel noticed the change. "You're thinking too much again," he said one night. David smiled faintly. "I'm just thinking about tomorrow." "Tomorrow is fine," Samuel said, "as long as it doesn't swallow today." They laughed quietly. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, washing the dust from the city's face. Inside, two men sat in the dim glow of a candle, surrounded by silence, wealth, and uncertainty. Far across town, Richard O'Deely sat in his empty mansion, pacing like a man haunted. He had sent his men to search every dump, every roadside heap, every truck. Nothing. His millions had vanished into the belly of the city. His voice grew hoarse from shouting. His servants whispered behind his back. Even his allies began to turn away. Power was slipping, one day at a time. And so, while one man lost everything, another gained the same thing by chance. Fate didn't steal, it merely traded hands. In the coming days, that trade would test not just fortune, but the very souls of both men. The days that followed were golden in a quiet way. For the first time in years, David and Samuel weren't chasing survival. They were planning it. The little shop Samuel opened began to grow. He fixed broken motorcycles, built trust with drivers, and soon earned the respect of the neighborhood. David, meanwhile, started lending small loans to traders. He called it a helping hand, but deep down, he knew it was something more. It was power. They didn't flaunt their money, but their change didn't go unnoticed. People began to whisper. "Those men at the edge of the city, how did they rise so fast?" Rumors travel faster than truth. And in a city where secrets are currency, it wasn't long before those whispers reached the wrong ears. Across town, Richard O'Deely sat alone in his office, face pale from sleepless nights. His men had searched every corner, every landfill, every dump. Nothing. The mattress was gone. His fortune vanished into thin air. Each day, without answers, tightened the grip of fear around his chest. He'd gone from king to ghost. Business partners stopped returning calls. The governor, once his ally, now spoke to him with a politician's distance. His empire, built on arrogance and bribes, was crumbling fast. One evening, while nursing a glass of whiskey, he overheard a conversation between two men at the bar. They spoke of scavengers who suddenly wore fine clothes, who had moved from the dump into a renovated building. The words hit him like a blade. He leaned closer. "Where?" he asked quietly. The men looked at him, uncertain. Richard slipped a note across the counter. "Just tell me where." By morning, he had the address. When the black SUV pulled up at the edge of the unfinished building that day, the air felt heavier. David was sitting outside, counting money from a small loan repayment. Samuel was working on a motorcycle nearby. Neither of them noticed the car until its door opened. Three men stepped out, Richard among them. He looked older now, thinner, his eyes sunken but sharp. The sight of him made something cold crawl up David's spine. "Good morning," Richard said softly. His tone was polite, almost calm, but his eyes burned. David stood, uncertain. "Can we help you?" Richard smiled faintly. "Oh, you can help me, yes. You have something that belongs to me." Samuel moved closer, tense. "I think you're mistaken, sir." Richard's gaze shifted to the mattress inside the room. Even covered with new sheets, he recognized it instantly. His voice cracked. "Where did you get that?" David hesitated. He could have lied, but his mouth went dry. "We found it at the dump," he said, "weeks ago." Richard stepped forward, trembling with anger. "Do you know what's inside that mattress? Do you know what you're playing with?" David's eyes narrowed. "I know it's not yours anymore. You threw it away." Richard's voice rose. That money? Those are years of my life. Do you think you can steal from me and live to enjoy it? Samuel stepped between them. You left it in the trash. Nobody stole anything. For a moment, all three men stood there, the tension thick enough to choke on. Richard's guards reached for their jackets. David took a slow step forward. If this money made you this way, maybe losing it was mercy. The words hit Richard like a slap. He glared at David, chest heaving. Then suddenly he laughed, a bitter, broken laugh that turned into a cough. Mercy? You think God gave you my life as a lesson? David didn't answer. He just looked at the older man, the same kind of man who had once sat in air-conditioned rooms, deciding the fate of people like him. Richard's anger drained into exhaustion. His hands trembled. Give it back, he whispered. Please. For a long time, David said nothing. He looked at Samuel, who stood silently by, eyes heavy with conflict. Then David turned back to Richard and said quietly, I can't. It's already gone. We used it to live, to build something decent. Richard's shoulders sagged. His eyes glistened. He looked around the room, the walls patched with cement, the smell of oil and smoke, and for the first time he seemed small, powerless. He sank into a chair, face in his hands. All my life I thought money made me safe, he murmured. I kept it close and it still ran from me. David watched him for a long moment, then said softly, Maybe it didn't run. Maybe it just changed owners. Richard looked up, tears streaking his face. What will you do with it? Something you never did, David said. Something honest. For the first time, Richard didn't argue. He stood slowly, nodding as if he understood. Without another word, he walked back to the car. His guards followed. The SUV drove away, leaving only the sound of dust under its tires. Samuel exhaled, voice low. You think he'll come back? David shook his head. No, he came to see the end of himself. Now he's gone. Days later, news spread through the city like smoke. Richard O'Deely was found dead in his mansion, a glass of whiskey still in his hand. Heart failure, they said. Some called it karma, others called it peace. David read the headline and sat quietly for a long time. Then he folded the paper and whispered, Rest now. Years passed. David and Samuel's fortunes grew. Not overnight, but steadily, honestly. They opened a small factory that employed men from the dump, giving them what no one ever gave them, dignity. People called them blessed. Some called them lucky. But David never forgot where it began. On that day, in the trash heap, when he lifted a mattress without knowing it carried both his fortune and his test. Every night, before locking up the office, he would pause by the window, watching the city lights shimmer across the skyline. Sometimes he swore he could almost hear a voice in the distance, Richard's voice, saying, Fear doesn't keep a man safe. Truth does. David would smile faintly, whisper a prayer, and walk home under the quiet sky. Fate had taken two broken men and traded their destinies. One fell from power to dust, the other rose from dust to purpose, and somewhere between them the city slept, unaware that one old mattress had carried the weight of both heaven and hell.